We're here. We're
Hello.
here. We're
We're
not at Whiskey Live. We're even somewhere better.
we'll take better than that. We've outlasted Holly and Phil this morning.
Oh, sorry, Michael Robinson. That is daytime TV people that have been axed.
Yeah, they had the feud. They've been arguing all week, but it's been all sort of smiley on the TV. But they've all been so they've all split up now. So me and Justin have outlasted these two on breakfast television. It's all over the news over here. It's dead funny. Michael, thank you for joining us all the way from Pennsylvania. And Michael is an expert in, well, I have to say it's one of it's a real defining point in American history. The Whiskey Rebellion. I keep telling everybody whiskey's all over. It's extremely important. And we're going to do the news. And then Michael's going to join us. So Michael, hello, how you doing?
I'm doing well. You are too kind. I wouldn't say I was an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous.
Well, that's it. Put it like this: you know more than us, and that's not going to be a big challenge mostly. But we're going to do the news, and then we're going to get caught up because you've got an amazing setup behind you there. I mean, the whole museum, you've buildings, you've all of this, and it looks as if people have put an awful lot of time, effort, and money into this.
A lot of time, a lot of effort, and we depend on the kindness of our visitors to fund our operations. We get very little government funding, if any.
Yeah. But we'll get caught up with you. We're going to do the news first, Justin. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. We'll hide, Michael, and we'll come back to you in about 20, 25 minutes.
See you in a wee minute, Michael. Oh, catch you back. Now, well, Justin, I'll have to mention Whiskey Live's on, so that's why half of our visitors will not be there because they'll all be lying pissed out their heads.
Probably true.
It's on down in Dublin this weekend. It's finished now. Looks as if everybody's been enjoying themselves. There's some dodgy people down at it all the same. You wouldn't want to be going down if you knew all who was down at it.
What, you mean like this guy?
Oh, there he is. Yeah, he's down at it, so he'll definitely not be joining us tonight. I was going to say he's definitely not. That's our Kit Charles. He's down there. Him and Margaret, his lovely wife Margaret's down there.
Look at that. Whiskey Live was brilliant. Glad I got to visit. Even old Michael Matthews must be back home.
Michael Matthews is home. I hope you everybody was there that enjoyed it. I was on a working today, so on a whiskey tour today. Lovely people. Some really, really nice people. Really interested, engaging. I think everybody loved it. But they're off sailing away to Liverpool for tomorrow. So yeah, that was nice. That was good.
Good. What else is on the news tonight, Marty?
Well, just a big up for Nottingham Forest. Forest won the Arsenal today. So Forest are staying up in the Premiership. Congratulations, Man City, but Forest staying up. So they are. You do have a photo there, Justin.
I do. That's the correct one.
That's the one. The correct one. So yeah, Forest staying up. So that's a bit of news for them. Just the other thing about Shortcross. A couple of other events coming up. Down at Shortcross, down at Radamon Estate, they are going to be doing the Blues Day. Doing the Blues Day down on the estate. I think they've had this before, and they are going to be doing that now. It's billed as a gin night or a gin day, but actually they're going to be selling their whiskey and all down at it as well. So if you've never been down to the estate, that would be a really good time to get down. It's a beautiful part of the world. It really is. And if you can get yourself down to that, it would be excellent for yourselves.
It is. The link's on screen there. And this is what the full details look like when you go to the link. Look at that there. Blues Sunday on the Terrace. It sort of coincides with Belfast Blues Festival as well. It's on at the minute.
Yeah. It seems like a nice evening to have. You get a free gin and tonic if you get down there. But as I say, they'll be selling their whiskies down there, so it might be a nice time to get down. try out some of their whiskies. Their new independent bottling stuff that they have out. Still haven't got to try those, but I'll have to get that sorted out. I'll have to get that remedied because the branding on it is just beautiful. But we'll have to get that sorted. Other whiskey event coming up next Friday night. I have a whiskey tasting over in the Theatre on the Mill, or it's actually in Ballyclare Town Hall. The tickets are available at the Theatre on the Mill. You're going to get 4 whiskies, me whittering away, a friend of mine doing a bit of music to sort of go along with the whiskies, tell a bit of a story, and for £12.50.
Wow,
I know.
that is very, 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 very reasonable indeed.
Oh, it is.
I mean, yeah, it is. This is what it looks like. If you want to go to the page, there's the link there to Theatre at the Mill. And the page itself is, well, it's one of the Theatre at the Mill pages. And you just click that link, go there, hit book now. It is fully secure because it's the Theatre at the Mill's the theatre, one of the many art and cultural venues that Newton Abbey and Antrim Borough Council sort of maintain.
Mm-hmm.
But you're actually not in Theatre at the Mill. You're in the Town Hall in Ballyclare.
I'm in the Town Hall. It's in the Town Hall in Ballyclare. It's sort of they have it billed there as an Ulster Scotch evening. It's all going to be Irish whiskies. It's basically a whiskey tasting and elements of the history and the importance of the whole area on the history of Scotch and bourbon and all of that, and the tradition from here as well. So it's be a nice evening, and for £12.50 you can't really go far wrong, you know.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So that'll be nice. Now, other news: Middleton have decided that they are going to pull the pin on the Barrel Club, and I don't think there's too many people will be all that bothered about it disappearing. I don't think it was necessarily. It was a good enough idea, but I don't think it actually done very much. So if you log on to the website, you get this message: they are no longer taking new members. To be honest, it was £549 to become a member of it.
So some of these clubs we've heard about, they're extremely good value because you're paying a lot less than what you get out of it in many of these clubs.
Yeah, well, I always thought this would be a bit of a strange one to be a member of because it's quite expensive. I mean, let's be honest, £549 for a year's membership without actually really knowing what you're going to get. Now, if there had been a couple of exclusive bottles thrown in for that money, then I would imagine it would certainly be worth it, certainly in terms of people wanting to collect and flip. Then there would be, but it doesn't seem to have really done anything of any great particular note. I don't know anybody that actually paid the money that thought, oh wow, this is superb. Now apparently, was it this year or last year you were guaranteed a bottle of Middleton Very Rare? Is that worth all the outlay and not really knowing what you're going to be getting for your money? Well, I don't think so. So I don't think there'll be too many people crying over it. Probably was a good idea.
So what are they going to do? Are they going to stop it from the date the last person paid 1 year later?
I don't know the exact details of it. There is they posted a message. Basically, it's a little bit vague, but you have the message there, Justin?
I do. Yep, there it is. There.
Yep. So
I'll make it a bit bigger. There you go.
So
Look at that there.
Just concluding with your June drop, which will include another exclusive bottling. So there you go. As I say, I don't think anybody's really all that disappointed about it, to be honest. But there is much excitement because the Dreamcast release number 6 is coming. It was announced this week that a 27-year-old port to port is what it's being called. It's Ruby Port, Bourbon, and Tawny Port. Next port of call. Now, in the press release, Billy Layton and Dave McCabe, they took a cask of 27-year-old bourbon, cask whiskey, a 28-year-old Ruby Port, married them together and then finished them for 3 months in tawny port casks. So 780 bottles, 500 millilitres, €580 a bottle. A ballot will be held for Birdhouse members on the 22nd of May. Hugely collectible, very tasty, and as in terms of investment stuff, it's an absolute no-brainer. These bottles, they are collectible and they just shut up in value. So be loads of people wanting to get their hands on this. The site will probably crash the same as these things usually do. Put an extra 50p in the meter, Irish Distillers. But yeah, that's probably just, if you haven't heard that it's going up for sale or up for ballot on the 22nd, then if you're wanting to get one of those, then get yourself one of those. New release that has come out, and it's a bit of an interesting one. It's Jim Beam Suntory are going to release an American single malt. Okay.
Right.
Now, if you go to the webpage there, Justin.
Yep.
Freddie Noe, the 8th generation master distiller of the Fred Noe Distillery, leads Beam's family's first foray into this emerging category of American whiskey. And they go on to describe what they're going to do and blah, 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 blah. Taste of American whiskey. There is a little bit of a difference here, because on the web page, if you scroll down, it comes up and says they're going to use the same hand-selected American malted barley for the mash, and they use Jim Beam family jug yeast in the fermentation. The single malt was then distilled in a column still and aged for 5 years in barrels that were toasted, then quickly charred to a char level 1. Obviously, for anyone who knows, a single malt over here can't be a single malt if it goes through a column still. So that would be a difference between Scotch, Irish whiskey and what they're now putting out as American single malt. Also, not 100% sure what they mean by it's aged in toasted and then charred casks. So do they toast the casks and then char them? Or do they toast the casks, put the liquid in, disgorge them, then char them? I'm not 100% sure of the process of that. It just doesn't read right. It doesn't make much sense.
Can they get away with this because they don't really have proper technical files in lots of the regions?
That's it. It's being run through a column still. Yeah. It'll be interesting enough, I'm sure. It's $59.99 a bottle, bottled at 47%. As I say, aged for 5 years. But it's nice to see some of the big guys trying these kind of things and stepping out. And at least, to be fair, they are giving you disclosure. They're turning around and telling you that that's what it is. So that's quite a nice thing for them to try. Bit different. Again, we'll have to try it and see what it's like.
Good.
Now, next release of Method and Madness, again from Irish Distillers. And this is
great stuff, this, Marty. Great stuff.
Well,
Method and Madness, I really enjoy that. Yeah.
Well, they're always a bit different. And this is Gariana Oak. The Gariana Oak, I had to sort of Google this. Remember we talked about this one time before about all the new different styles of wood that's going to be used. And this is Oregon White Oak, which is apparently, according to the Irish Distillers, it's the only native oak in Washington State. And it gives a complexity. They're always going to say that anyway. Nobody's going to say, it gives a really bland, dull flavour. It's not great for the marketing PR department. Although in saying that, that's like some of the local distilleries around here might come out with something daft like that. Anyway, they say it's complex smoked applewood, treacle, raisins, clove, etc. So this will be a nice one to try, actually. €95 a bottle. But the Method of Madness stuff is a bit different. It's a bit funky. It's finished for between 4 and 12 months in these oak casks. So that'll be nice to try that. I'm looking forward to trying that one.
It's been a while since there's been a Method in Madness. Has
Yeah,
it?
they kind of do it every year. So it's been a year really since the last one.
Right. Some of them seem more prolific than that, but anyway.
Well, it's only ever really an experimental thing for Irish distillers. It just so happens that they get to experiment with these things, put them out, and then if they're really well received, it's something that'll be coming out a bit further down the line
Okay.
as a main release or something like that. That's kind of what they're for.
Excuse me. What kind of money's in that, Marty?
€95. It's not
That's
bad.
not too bad. Not bad.
It's not too bad
Not
at
bad
all. I don't think it's limited release. There's probably quite a lot of it, so there shouldn't be much bother getting a bottle, which again these days is quite nice as well. Now,
Good.
we've had whiskies finished in various sherries, various wines, various oaks, various things. Now what we're getting is a Land Rover finished in an Islay cask. You know what I've done there? I saw this the other day and I had to laugh, right? It's the Land Rover Classic Defender V8 Islay Edition. It's dead funny.
Tell me this: is it one of those boat card things?
Well, put it like this: it's a Land Rover Defender. It's basically everything, and it's always going to last. It's going to last forever, anyway. It's inspired. As we go onto the page, the new Classic Defender Works V8 Islay Edition is the first heritage-themed Works V8 to come from Land Rover, and it takes its inspiration from the personal 1965 Land Rover owned by Spencer Wilkes, the managing director of the Rover Car Company. It was actually because the original Land Rovers were actually tested at the Lagan Estate, his Lagan Estate on the island of Islay, and so there is actually a proper connection. It's dead funny because the bespoke interior is trimmed in leather with unique tweed detailing from the Islay woolen mill, chosen specifically for the Defender Islay Edition. Specially designed center cubby features removable wooden tray crafted from walnut, incorporating actual whiskey cask barrel oak from Islay's award-winning Killoman distillery. I think this is a great idea. It's dead funny. I mean, there's only 60 of them, something being made. The Defender Islay Edition will be available in 90 and 110 station wagon body designs, exclusively limited to just 30 units. That'll not be cheap. But
No, you'd have to sell a few bottles to buy that one.
I would need your money that you're getting off the Indians. That's whether. But yeah, there's Ross saying they should paint it Brooklady blue. That'd be a good idea. But no, I thought it was dead funny. You've all these weird and wonderful cask finishes, and now they're finishing Land Rovers and Islay stuff. It's a bit nuts.
It looks traditional, but a lot of cars are that weird grey color, which you could describe as bland, but it's actually quite cool, isn't it? At the same time,
yeah, it's a bit like the walls of my house. But I mean, no, the thing is, it says there it's inspired by Spencer Wilkes' own vehicle, which was probably still running. I mean, look how many of those Land Rover Defenders are still on the road. They do everything all the time, no problem.
Actually, I tell you better than that. Michael Portillo was on GB News, and he was actually at the guys, the Dunsford collection, who have the largest collection of Land Rovers and Range Rovers, and it was absolutely fabulous. Fabulous.
I always remember the episode of Top Gear years ago when they were test driving 4x4s, and it was all like the Porsche Cayenne and all these high-end 4x4s, and they all kept getting stuck. And then the next thing is this wee farmer who's about 90 just come down the Land Rover Defender and just pulled them all out.
True.
What a car. Next up, we're over to the US again for I always find this a bit odd, but it's the way things are done over there. Virginia. And a row has broke out over the lottery, because what happens is they get an allocation of spirits, and then there's a sort of statewide lottery, online lottery to see who wins it. Now, this is the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection online lottery coming from the Virginia ABC. Now, you put it in perspective. It's one entry per household, apparently. The 18-year-old George Stagg, 770 bottles. The Thomas Sazerac Rye, 286 bottles. The William Weller, 209. And the Sazerac Rye 18, only 48 bottles of it. Okay?
Right.
Now, apparently, there was two guys won all four of them. Now, you don't enter it to win all four. You only enter it to win a bottle. But there was two guys randomly selected that I surprisingly won all four bottles. There was 50 people won 3 out of the 4, and 200 people won 2 bottles. Now, that seems as if there's a slight skewing of the... It all depends how many people have entered. But it does seem a bit strange.
This sounds like the time the telephone engineers won the Concorde flights. Do you remember that?
Yes, imagine.
Yes, imagine. Yes. Yeah.
But it does seem a bit strange that two guys won all 4 bottles.
Wasn't there another story about this where the IRS or something, or the ATF were doing something and acquiring the stuff? Didn't we do this a couple of weeks ago?
That was they were investigating because there was guys who seemed to be buying up other people's allocations of it, and they had so much of the stuff that Sazerac said we don't give that amount of allocation to anybody, and yet these guys seemingly had it. So It does. Whenever these things are in demand and there's so many people looking for them, it is quite a difficult thing to figure out how you do this, but it does seem as if there's a bit of a strange thing going on there. But
Good evening.
Now, last up on the news, Talisker have released a new bottle, Talisker Parlay for Wilder Seas. It's to do with a rewilding of water charity, and the bottles are made from 100% recycled glass, designed with a ceramic decoration to reduce labeling, with topographic lines inspired by the undulating underwater landscape of Skye's coastline. Now, Talisker is donating £3 from every bottle to the Parlay initiatives that support an ocean protection and preservation. I think the bottle looks fabulous. I think it looks really, really sharp. It's a nice charity. They're building eco biodiversity in the sea, and so on and so forth. I think it needs to be highlighted, these things, for the people are doing for charity. They've raised thousands for this charity already. They've worked with them before. This bottle, the idea is they want to protect 100 million square meters of marine ecosystem. It's going to cost £75, and it's finished in ex-cognac casks. So yeah, I think I like this. I think the bottle looks sharp. I kind of like Talisker. I have a fondness for Talisker, if I'm honest. And you've just flipped around there. What happened to you there?
I just realised that I was the wrong way round. I don't know why it's doing this. They keep on updating it and they keep on swapping things. And normally when you log in, you're the right way around. And now you're the wrong way around. I don't know what they're playing at. But it's slightly. Do you think the new design's slightly slicker? It's sort of. It seems more contemporary, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the things that aren't recycled are obviously the paint that goes into the bottle design and the packaging at the top. But I mean, I think this is really a way forward. If people want to get away from doing the labeling and all that kind of stuff, this is a nice way of doing it. And the bottle looks really sharp. So yeah, good on them. As I say,
does.
£75 a bottle, and £3 of it goes to charity. So hopefully they raise lots and lots and lots of money for that. Oh, good luck to Katie Taylor tonight as well. She's boxing in Dublin for the first time in her professional career, which is ridiculous. The most successful athlete ever from Ireland This is the first time she ever boxed in front of her home crowd. So good luck to her. And if anybody's watching the fight, keep me up to date. What's
I
going
would
on.
imagine a lot of people would have nipped out of Whiskey Live, had tickets for that, and had tickets for Katie Taylor as well. I would imagine.
Aye, I would
We
say
saw
Cat Charles maybe has a row going on with how many whatever Katie Taylors. No, but as I say,
Aye.
no, it's good luck. It's ridiculous. The most successful.
Knowing him, he's probably going in and saying, "I'm her dad, I'm her dad, I'm her
Look.
dad," and got in.
Well, it's a $1 million baby.
Aye.
But no, it's good luck to her. So yeah, now that's the news all for this week, and now we're going to get talking to Michael Robinson.
I tell you what, we'll whiz through that 25 minutes. We're actually on time. Here we go. Show. He's about to arrive. Here he is. He's in the stream. Evening, Michael. How
There
are
he
you?
is. He's back again.
There I am.
There you are. You are there, definitely. Michael, it's nice to get talking to you.
It's great to be with you guys, and thanks for an invitation.
No, you're more than welcome. I mentioned there that I was doing a whiskey tour today, and I always happen because most of the people we get on these are from the States, and I like to tell them about the sort of connections between this part of Ireland, the northern part of Ireland, and the distilling industry sort of basically started. The foundations of it started with the Scots-Irish when they went to the US. But then I always mention the Whiskey Rebellion, and just that it was a really sort of crucial point in very early American history. Tell us a bit about the background of the Whiskey Rebellion. How did it start? How did it lead up to it?
Well, first to introduce you to our museums, we are in existence because we
have lost him. He was stable the whole time, and then we have lost him just when we go to talk to him. There you go. That's Sod's Law. What do you think of that? Couldn't make that up, Marty.
Couldn't make it up. Little bit of background to try and get him back there.
So hopefully Michael will know to log back in again and talk to us because he was stable. He's been on the line now for 45 minutes and it was hunky-dory, solid as a rock. And as soon as we go to do it, it keels over. Listen, you can probably get more signal in 1865 with a copper cable that Lord Kelvin sorted out. What do you think?
More likely. I'll give him that.
Here he is. He's back in the room. He's back in the room. Here we go. Fingers crossed. He's back in the room. Are you back in the room? You are back in the room. Evening, Michael. Will you just swing yourself round again, and then you won't be in mirror image if you can.
So we'll just wait for Michael to get this sorted out, and then we'll get back on again. These things always happen. They just drop off every so often. So, Michael, tell us. You're going to tell us about the museums there. Let us know. Continue on, my friend.
So, what you're looking at represents a kitchen that was in the back of the Bradford House. The Bradford House was the home of David Bradford. It was built in 1788, and he moved to I guess you could call it downtown Washington. Washington was full of log cabins.
Now, this is Washington, Pennsylvania. It's not Washington, D.C. or Washington State. It's Washington, Pennsylvania.
Washington, Pennsylvania. And David was an attorney. He was also pretty wealthy as a shipper, and he built this stone house in 1788 for his new bride because she didn't want to live out in the country where the indigenous people had a habit of trading licks with the settlers. And he, as an attorney, he wanted to be close to the courthouse, which was just up the street.
Fair enough. Doesn't want to commute. They don't.
So the Bradford House is our museum that talks about 18th century living on the frontier, because the United States at the time ended at the Ohio River. And south on the Ohio River to the Mississippi River, you could go down to Spanish territory, where New Orleans was controlling commerce, and
Mhm.
the new country did not want commerce to be controlled by Spain. They wanted the commerce to be controlled in the United States, except it was an 11-day trek across all the mountains to Philadelphia, the capital at the time.
Yeah.
So the Bradford House is a National Historic Landmark, and that's why our organization, the Bradford House Historical Association, exists.
Yeah.
So we tell the story of David Bradford and how his family lived in the late 18th century. And then across the street, we have a museum that we opened 2 years ago dedicated to talking about the Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah.
So imagine, if you will, David Bradford's being a lawyer and shipping things, and all of a sudden the new country, the United States, after winning the Revolutionary War,
Hmm.
is saddled with debt. Both the states and the federal government owed about $75 million, which in the late 1700s was a fair sum.
Yeah.
And they wanted to pay that debt off. A lot of the debt was to France, who helped the United States in the Revolution. And Alexander Hamilton happened to be the first president's Secretary of Treasury, George
Yeah.
Washington's Secretary of Treasury. They thought whiskey was a luxury.
Yeah.
Whiskey was a good way to raise money if you put an excise tax on it. So the very first Congress of the United States passed an excise tax on distilled spirits.
Yeah.
And the people who lived in the frontier had just finished helping the country win the Revolutionary War, which was based upon taxation without representation. So they weren't very keen on having a new tax.
No, I can imagine. The history of whiskey is basically defined by the history of taxation, essentially. Let me get this right. The guys who fought in the Revolutionary War, lots of those are small distillers. They are distilling at home because it adds value to their product, and it means they can sell it as a whiskey.
A lot of the people in this part of the country, and the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't limited to Western Pennsylvania, but this was kind of the center point of it, were from Germany, and they were Scotch Irish. And they knew how to grow rye because they were used to that climate. In Kentucky, they were more used to growing corn. In fact, because of the Whiskey Rebellion and the tax, a lot of people left Pennsylvania and went to Kentucky, and they started distilling corn, and that's how bourbon was born.
That's how bourbon appeared. But the reason they were doing this was it was easier to transport a spirit. You know, if you were going to do it with corn or rye or any cereal, I mean, the infrastructure really wasn't conducive to transporting. You know, if you have a ton of corn, it's quite hard to move about, and there's more chance of it rotting and spoiling. But if you distill it, you add value to it, and it's easier to transport. That's correct, isn't it?
Exactly, and you know, carrying sheaves of rye on horseback or on a wagon, you may or may not get to market, like 11 days away in the rain and keeping all that dry. But you could carry a whole lot of distilled rye, and people didn't drink the water because it made them sick. So whiskey was the major thing that women, children, everyone drank whiskey, and there was no currency on the frontier. So you needed something to barter with. And after you made flour and were able to make bread, and you had leftover grain, you would distill it.
It's a natural thing to think, you know.
If you needed some sugar, or you wanted to buy your wife some fabric to make a dress, you traded whiskey for that. That was the main currency. So when the federal government comes along and says, we're going to tax you. And some of the fines for not following the law were $250. They didn't
Yeah.
have that kind of currency.
No. You'd have to pay for it in whiskey.
Well,
Yeah.
they also had to travel 11 days to Philadelphia and wait for going to court in
Yeah.
Philadelphia. And if you're a farmer and you have
Yeah.
to leave for a month because somebody has cited you for not paying an excise tax, your whole growing season's shot, basically.
Yeah. So it's basically going to cost you a year's living as such, you know.
It did. So whiskey was not a luxury on the frontier.
Yeah.
On the seaboard, there were larger distillers. They got a break on the excise tax because of the volume they did. And in the frontier, people just did not pay the tax. They started attacking the tax collectors.
Now,
And
this is the thing. Now, the government, the first Congress, imposes this tax on distilled spirits, on whiskey. As you say, the larger distillers, they're not really affected that much by it because they can produce it in volume. It's really the smaller guys that are going to be hit hardest. George Washington was a distiller, was he not?
he was a distiller after he retired from the presidency.
Mm.
He had a Revolutionary War officer as his caretaker at Mount Vernon, and he came to him in 1797. The Whiskey Rebellion was in 1794.
Aye.
And he said, we have all this grain. I think we should build a distillery and open it. So they did. And in 1799, Washington was probably the largest distiller in the country. He did 11,000 gallons of whiskey.
I'm just thinking, is there a connection with these records? There's no the tax has been reduced, and a politician takes advantage of this. Amazing. But anyway, we'll get back to the rebellion. So they've imposed the tax. Obviously, this is hitting the guys, the likes of guys in Western Pennsylvania. Hits them quite hard. Now, what's the first stages of the rebellion starting? What happens there?
Well, once they figured out what the excise tax law required of them, they got upset about not only the tax, but not everyone could read and write, and there were very rigorous record-keeping requirements. You had to get a certificate from the tax inspectors for all your whiskey that was made. You had to keep logs of it. You had to have signage on your distillery.
Okay.
And if you could not prove that you had paid the tax, they could take your property, including your wagons, your horse, your still, that didn't happen because the rebels didn't allow the tax collectors to even operate. Once somebody agreed to be a tax collector, they would harass them, they would tar and feather them, they would burn their barn, they would threaten them with bodily harm if they didn't quit doing that.
Yeah.
And so the people who did pay the tax, the rebels also didn't like. They would harass them. And a lot of the rebels were called Tom the Tinker.
Okay.
Because a tinker was a person who fixed things.
Yep.
And if you paid the tax, Tom the Tinker's men would fix your still.
So people who were actually being law abiding, the rebels decided to attack them as well. It goes from it gets more serious than just attacking a few stills of guys that are paying taxes and stuff. It grows, it gains momentum.
Well, there was a Revolutionary War general by the name of General John Neville. He lived north of Washington and south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And they made him the regional inspector of the excise tax.
Mhm.
And then he had a number of people who were tax collectors. Well, because people were ignoring and running off tax collectors, he got a federal marshal and he went to go see someone who hadn't registered their still or paid the tax. His name was Oliver Miller in a place south of Pittsburgh. And the neighboring farmers heard that they were there and started shooting their weapons off in the air and ran General Neville and this marshal off. Well, that stirred up the people who were against the tax, and they were meeting and they were trying to negotiate with the government on how to make the tax more palatable.
Yeah.
And they had meetings. The rebels would meet in different places, and they decided that they should go to General Neville's home, which
Mhm.
was called Bower Hill, and confront General Neville and find out who was paying the tax. So a contingent of men led by another Revolutionary War person by the name of McFarland went to Bower Hill and demanded the records from those tax collectors who were actually successful, getting people to pay the tax.
Getting them to pay up, yeah.
And the general had a couple soldiers from the fort in Pittsburgh there, and McFarland thought that they had put up a white flag and stepped out from behind his protection and was, excuse me, I need to back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Actually, there was gunfire broke out, and Oliver Miller's nephew, who was with the rebels, was killed. So the rebels retreated, and the next day they came back with 500 men.
Okay.
And General Neville had left the plantation, but he got some soldiers from Pittsburgh to try to protect his property. But it was a small contingent, just a dozen or so men. So here 500 rebels show up.
Yeah.
And they were led by McFarland. McFarland thought they waved a white flag and stepped out to move forward to talk about a truce, and he was shot and killed. So the rebels proceeded to burn down Neville's house and outbuildings, his slaves' quarters, and that was like the first real shots in the Whiskey Rebellion.
So the Whiskey Rebellion, it was basically the leader of the rebels, who weren't really rebels at this point. I mean, they were okay. They were harassing stuff, but it went a step further when McFarland was shot.
Well, yeah. Once they saw that they were trying to get serious and send out marshals to serve writs to make people go to Philadelphia to stand trial for not complying with the law, that really riled up the citizens.
Yeah.
So the rebels kept meeting, and their numbers kept growing. And there were people who were local politicians and respected, along with them, David Bradford, who was an attorney. And David Bradford got inflamed by all this and was wanting to take major acts to show the new government how serious they were about the injustice of this excise tax.
Yeah.
So David Bradford took his rebels, and they met at a place, strangely enough, called Whiskey Point, and they were 7,500 strong. The plan was to march on Pittsburgh and burn it down to prove the point about how serious they were.
It was prove a point. Like if you just burned down an entire town, I suppose. At that point,
at that point, Pittsburgh wasn't really much bigger than Washington.
Yeah.
It had the federal fort, and the cooler heads among the rebels, including Albert Gallatin, who later became Secretary of Treasury under a different administration, said, let's just have a show of force. Let's march on Pittsburgh. Well, Pittsburgh found out they were coming. It's kind of hard to hide 7,500 men. And they decided to meet these rebels outside of town with food and drink.
All right, good. Excellent.
And so they went to Pittsburgh and they met out of town and they had some drink, and they only wound up burning down one of General Neville's associates' barn on the hilltop overlooking Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh was spared.
It's a bit of a climb down. We're going to go and destroy Pittsburgh, and we'll just burn down one wee barn because they'll give us some sandwiches and a couple of glasses of whiskey, so we're all right. But at this point now, Washington, President Washington's obviously beginning to hear about this insurrection.
President Washington and Alexander Hamilton decided, they tried to negotiate all the time to calm things down, and sent emissaries out to the frontier, and the leaders of the rebels and the local politicians, the owner of the Pittsburgh newspaper, all met and tried to hammer out things. And the whiskey excise tax was levied in 1791. In 1793, they modified the law.
Yeah.
And they thought that would calm things down. But what they said was, you still have to pay the tax, but it's going to be based upon the capacity of your still.
Yeah, they tried something similar to that in Ireland. Didn't go down well, because it doesn't really work, because it means you have to fire your still constantly to pay the tax, and the more you fire up, the more tax you have to pay. So they've done the same thing over in Ireland, and it didn't work.
Well, and that was the issue with the farmers. If they only had a little bit of grain left over, and they had a 50-gallon still, which was a pretty big still for farmers, and you wanted to make 10 gallons of whiskey, you had to pay as if you made 50 gallons of whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the problem that happened over here.
So that didn't really calm them down. But with this march on Pittsburgh and people being killed at the Battle of Bower Hill, Washington and his Secretary of Treasury, Hamilton, thought that things were really getting out of hand. They, as I said, they didn't want commerce going down the river and dealing with Spain. They didn't want their state, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, being out of hand.
Yeah.
And they thought it was time to raise a militia. And at that time, there was no standing army.
No.
The United States didn't have an army. So President Washington asked for militia from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, totaling 13,500 men.
Now, these guys are not particularly well trained. They're not a standing army. So essentially, you have 13,000 government troops going to be heading up against 7,500 rebels. That's in a fledgling state. This is going to be a fairly major issue, because it's a brand new country essentially.
David Bradford and some of the more vociferous rebels thought about pulling away from the United States and forming their own country called. And there was that in the wind, and of course the new government didn't like that. But the cooler heads wanted to see a resolution, and there were a lot of people sympathetic to keeping the new government alive.
What were they going to call the country there, Michael? Did its name elude you, or could the United States of America be called the
Whiskeyville,
the Whiskeyville, or the People's Republic of the United States of America, or what?
They thought it should be called West Sylvania.
It's like Transylvania almost.
And that was, later on, there were other people who felt the same way as the country grew westward. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr had a duel, and Aaron Burr was cited for treason because he wanted to create a country on the other side of the Ohio River with people, and so they were after him for treason. So it was a kind of a common movement to look for freedom when you have a government you feel is oppressing you. The other thing they didn't like was, as I mentioned, Bradford moved to town because he didn't want his wife attacked by the indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there were massacres on either side of the frontier. People would massacre Indians. The Indians would massacre frontiers people. They didn't feel the federal government was protecting them. The roads to go back east to Philadelphia, the capital, were horrible, and it took so long. There were boundary disputes between Virginia and Pennsylvania, which ultimately resulted in the creation of the Mason-Dixon line that settled which part of this Western PA was in Virginia and which part was in Pennsylvania. So there were a number of issues, and the excise tax was like the last straw.
Yeah. Now, Washington raises his militia, and he leads it himself.
He did lead it himself. Well, you had Maryland and Virginia are south of Pennsylvania. So you had the governor of Virginia have Light Horse Harry Lee lead troops from Virginia. You had another officer leading troops from Maryland. And you had the New Jersey troops and the Pennsylvania troops. They all met up in the middle of Pennsylvania in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And they were led and reviewed by Washington. This was a larger force of men than Washington ever had in the American Revolution.
Now, the rebellion itself, it sort of peters out, does it? I mean, it's not as if there's a mass battle between these guys. They come to a kind of agreement, don't they?
They saw that they were going to be outnumbered, and there were discussions about what they should do. But the rebellion just kind of fizzled out when they heard these troops were in Carlisle and moving that way. David Bradford decided he better head south. He was found guilty of treason. All the other rebels, some were arrested after the troops got there. Washington didn't go any further in Carlisle. He says, I've got to go back to Philadelphia and run the government. You and Light Horse Harry Lee, he's telling Alexander Hamilton, go and mop the rest of this up out in the West. So he went back to run the country, and Light Horse Harry Lee, who happened to be Robert E. Lee's father. Robert E. Lee was a Confederate general later in history. They came to Washington, formed an encampment, and they began arresting rebels. They rounded up about 100 rebels in the middle of the night, and the worst of them were 20 people. This is in early December. Were marched back to Philadelphia in the cold. They've been rousted out of their bed without shoes or coats or any food. They were marched into Philadelphia. The streets were crowded with Federalists in support of the government, throwing things at them. On Christmas Eve, they marched by Washington's house, and ultimately they were pardoned. Except for David Bradford.
So David Bradford, these are the presidential pardons, correct?
That was, the excise tax was the first tax in our country by the first Congress. It was the first time troops were led by a president, first and only time. First time troops fired on U.S. citizens. And the first use of the presidential pardon.
So the president pardons all of the rebels?
All except David Bradford. David's wife wrote and asked George Washington to try to get her husband pardoned. And Washington had dealings with Bradford. I think he handled some
Right.
of his land deals in Pennsylvania. He owned a lot of land in Western Pennsylvania. And so I think he felt particularly aggrieved by Bradford, turning on him like that.
Yeah.
So when Washington left and John Adams became president, he pardoned David Bradford in 1805.
So he got pardoned in the end. But I find it fascinating that the whiskey was the currency basically of the western part of the fledgling nation of the US, and that that this rebellion was so many firsts because it was such an important part of the economy and the life of the people over there. Excuse me. Now, your museums, you have two museums: the David Bradford House, the house that one of the leaders lived in. The museum across is totally to the Whiskey Rebellion. Yeah.
Yes, we had to tell both stories at our National Historic Landmark, and it was kind of awkward because here you are walking through rooms showing how the family lived, and you had to weave in the Whiskey Rebellion. So we decided to build a separate museum that told that story, and we've been open for 2 years now.
Yeah. And how are you getting visitors numbers? Now, just to put it in context, you have a festival coming up on the 7th.
We
and
do
the
have
8th.
a festival. We have an annual festival we've been doing now for over 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
It happens the second weekend of July every year. This year, that's the 7th and 8th. We have reenactments of tax collectors being tarred and feathered.
Can I get
And-
Justin to be a tax collector in one of your things? I would pay good money to see everybody that watches this show will pay good money to see him tarred and feathered. I promise you. So that's
Most
what we do.
definitely.
We'll get Justin over. I'll tar him and feather him.
We have a period wardrobe. We could dress him up like a.
Oh, Justin has
like
his
a
own period
tax
wardrobe.
collector.
I actually have my own period wardrobe, but that's another story.
By the way, guys, I have to give you a plug. I went into my stash, and I'm drinking a dram of
Excellent.
this 12-year-old Tullamore Dew that
Tullamore
I've
Dew.
drug out of my stash.
Good man. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I'm going to have. I have a bottle of Beam's Choice from I think it's from the 1970s, and it says on it since 1795, so the year after the Whiskey Rebellion. So this is one of these old sort of historic mash bill bottlings that I have. I can't even remember where I picked this up. So I have one of these in your honour.
Well,
now the festival. Tell
cheers.
us more about the festival. Cheers, chin chin.
So the outcome of the Whiskey Rebellion, after the rebels kind of dissolved into the woodwork, they made all the citizens of Western Pennsylvania pledge allegiance to the government and that they would abide by the laws and wouldn't cause trouble anymore. And so
they all became moonshiners.
the presence of the army brought some prosperity.
Yeah,
because the army had to have provisions. And one of the rebels was a minister by the name of Reverend John Corbley. Reverend Corbley was responsible for opening more than 36 churches in the area. He was a Baptist, which is strange because there's a whole lot of Presbyterians around here.
a lot of the Presbyterians turned over to Baptist church. I mean, that was reasonably common, wasn't it?
Reverend Corbley lived outside of town, and he was going to church one Sunday with his wife and daughters, and he was lagging back because he was meditating about his sermon, and his wife and daughters were set upon. His wife was killed. His daughters were scalped. And Reverend Corbley, the Bibles that he had with him that he was meditating with are actually from the 1600s from England, and we have those on display here. But more interestingly, he was one of the 20 taken to Philadelphia on what we call the terrible night, when they were dragged from their beds and marched across the state. Washington did not want the army to be viewed as a conquering army. These were the citizens. And so they asked Reverend Corbley to come up with a price list for selling provisions to the army. And we have some of those documents that show what it costs for provisions, including whiskey. And that started bringing currency to the Western states. They didn't have to barter. They didn't have a barter economy. The other thing it did was the same year as the Whiskey Rebellion, the U.S. military had a battle in Ohio across the river. It's called the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which the Indians were defeated, and Washington, PA, was no longer threatened by the indigenous people. So life became more stable. To get 13,500 men across the state, they wound up improving the road. So the roads became better. Washington always thought there should be a good road to Western PA because as a young officer, he got his butt kicked against the French in an earlier battle. And when Thomas Jefferson became president, 2 presidents later, Congress appropriated money to build the National Road. At the same time, the Louisiana Purchase happened. And so people were moving westward because land was the way they paid Revolutionary War soldiers. And when the country got bigger, they could afford to give land grants and give people 40 acres and a mule or a square mile, whatever.
Yeah.
So you had currency, you had better roads, you had no more boundary disputes, and no more attacks by Indians.
Yeah, that's so. In some ways, the Whiskey Rebellion helped the whole area in general, and it certainly helped, I would imagine, with the fledgling industry of distilling, because as we know, a lot of these guys started to head south, as you said, and probably they started to move over into Louisiana, Kentucky, all that area, and help put up the distilling trade in the US.
Yeah, the rye whiskey from this area became a prized commodity, and it found its way all around the country. Now, bourbon is a little more popular than rye, although there's plenty of rye to be had.
Oh, and more and more becoming available.
And this, rye was a crop in this area because it's cooler, and it was more predominant than corn. But now you can find corn, barley, and rye just about everywhere in Pennsylvania.
As we're talking, we've got single malts, we have all this stuff now, but America's really where the whiskey scene's really gone crazy over in the States now. I mean, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger every day.
It really is. And Justin, I apologize for probably going totally off the photo script. One other thing I should mention is we do have a still display in this Whiskey Rebellion Museum to show what a 5-gallon still would produce. And I had a hand in developing that. It was a lot of fun.
Did I hear it hissing in the background? Did I hear it hissing in the background?
No, Justin, that's me coming with the tar. They just bung it over your head and tell you. That'd be great. So the Whiskey Festival is the 7th and the 8th of July?
Correct.
And what, other than wishing that Justin could get tarred and feathered, do you have whiskey tastings? Is there music? Is there food? What all goes on?
We have a tavern we open called the Blue Eagle Tavern that has spirits and wine. We have We have local beers. We have music. We have lots of food trucks. We have children's
I'm going.
area.
I'll be tarred and feathered.
Yeah. You can have a lot of fun before you're tarred and feathered. But,
Oh, right. Oh, we'll get them souped up. We'll get them softened up before we tar them.
It's the largest festival in downtown Washington, and we have thousands of visitors. It's totally free for the citizens, thanks to the largesse of our sponsors that support us. And we've been doing it now for 13 years.
Excellent. And listen, I hope it's every bit as successful going forward. I love the fact that, whiskey played such an important part in really the very early stages of the US. And I really like the fact that a lot of it was people from my part of the world that went over. The Scots-Irish arrived over, and it was nice to have that little connection. Justin, what intellectual thing are you going to come out with now?
It's not intellectual. I just want to say how much I did not like Alexander Hamilton, especially the musical Hamilton. I hate it with a vengeance.
Justin, the only...
I'm an Old Hickory supporter. Old Hickory, I love him.
I'm sure
it came from a mile away from here.
I'm sure Justin Lives, his Old Hickory's father left about 18 months before he was born, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Andrew Jackson was born about 18 months after they left where Justin's from, Carrickfergus. So yeah, so there's all these little connections, and it's nice to get chatting to you, Michael. Stay in touch. Let us know how the festival gets on. Send us over some pictures, and please consider getting Justin tarred. I might even tar and feather him here and send over the video of it.
Well, I was telling Justin before we went on that even though he likes Andrew Jackson, David Bradford's son, David Bradford Jr., David escaped to Spain, which was then Spanish West Florida. It became Louisiana, and he had a plantation. His daughter, Amanda, married Jefferson Davis's sister. Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederacy. So it seems like these people of wealth and power were well connected throughout the country.
They would have been, absolutely. I mean, I think Jackson founded the Democratic Party, and it's interesting because he was the first elected first guy who wasn't one of the sort of gentry, if you like. He was a commoner that was elected. He's the first person in Western history to be that. So yeah, but so many endlessly fascinating little things. Michael, thank you very much for telling us all about the museum. Thank you for telling us about the festival. Thanks for the history lesson. And do stay in touch and let us know what happens in July, because it'll be interesting to see the pictures of it, man.
I will do that, and thank you both for inviting us. And please tell your listeners to come see our museums if they're in this neck of the woods.
If you're ever in Western Pennsylvania, why would you not? If you're interested, thank you very much.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Michael. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitch, we're on Telegram. Wherever you get your podcast, just ask your smart speaker to play Irish Whiskey Review. I will give Russ the last word. Things haven't changed from then till now.
Taxing whiskey. I think it's time. What we'll do is to show as show of strength, we'll just tar and feather Justin in the middle of Belfast during the week.
Yep. Take it easy. Same time, same place.